Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Howard and I'm Operations Director at NCFE. NCFE are an educational services charity with a core purpose to promote and advance learning for a fairer and more inclusive society. And the topic of today's roundtable conversation is mental health. Mental health is high on the agenda for all of us in our sector, and we believe that through building mental fitness, we can support all individuals to fulfil their own potential and improve outcomes for your learners and staff. The purpose of today's roundtable discussion is to bring together leaders within FE to highlight the mental health education gap and explore how we can mainstream mental fitness within the FE sector. Through this event and other recent activities such as the FE Week Roundtable and Campaign for Learning's white paper, our aim is to address the mental health crisis within further education and ensure that no learner is left behind on their personal journey. We'll also have the opportunity to share some of the results from FE institutions who have embedded FICA and acknowledge the positive impact of reframing the duty of care within mental health into positive skills development. So I'm joined by a fantastic mix of colleagues from the sector today. And what I will do is I will come round and ask you all to introduce yourselves in terms of where you're from. So if we can start off with yourself, Chris.
Hi, afternoon. I'm Chris Beach. I'm Assistant Principal and Dean at Burton and South Derbyshire College. I've been part of the rollout and embedding of mental fitness through FICA at the college over the last year. I guess also my role has involves higher education predominantly in FE. And previously to that, I led a team of progress coaches as part of the pastoral support team in learner services. I guess really what, interestingly, and this might sound a little bit strange, is that despite us rolling out FICA and mental fitness initiatives, the more we roll this out, and I think this is atypical of college environments, is that we try and do it across the board. We try and roll out everything and expecting learners to engage with that on a whole piece. And of course, what most learners want to do is engage it in their own way, their own, it's a very much a differentiated engagement. And of course, we differentiate lots of activities within college delivery, but I suppose that's what I'm trying to get from this is I'm always curious as to how other people have done it, where I can pick up ways of engaging that audience, whether it's staff, learners, so that we do really start to increase the numbers of engaging in mental fitness, rather than just either dismissing it or saying it's fantastic or being on the fence. And I think the impact is going to come from the majority, the 80%, engaging with this.
And it's that collaborative collegiate approach that's so important, yes. Isn't it, Chris? Yeah, absolutely. Amy, if you can introduce yourself, please, that'd be fantastic.
Hi, my name's Amy Langford and I'm Executive Head of Inclusion at the Milton Keynes College Group. And what that means is that I oversee all of the support services across the college. And we've been working really hard over the last 3 to 5 years, working with partners across the city, be that CAMS, adult mental health, etc., working with local schools, academy trusts that have specialist mental health provision. We have a lot of work that we do internally and working, as I say, with partner organisations around wellbeing and resilience. And I think we're also developing our personal development curriculum as well. And we have quite a substantial wellbeing team. And for me, what I'd like to get out of today is to understand what colleagues across the sector are implementing, the impact it's having, and how we can kind of broaden our scope, really.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Amy. Richard, if I could come to you next.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Richard Caulfield, and I'm the Northwest Area Director for the Association of Colleges and also our National Lead on Mental Health. So I convene the AOC Policy Group and have led much of our work on mental health, the Mental Health Charter, and the whole college approach, and the recently launched CMET tool for self-evaluation in colleges. And I'm just really interested in the whole concept of mental fitness, where that fits into the toolbox for colleges in terms of their wider sort of role on wellbeing. I suppose I can see the absolute positivity in it and how it becomes part of that. I'm always really wary that we are careful not to find a silver bullet for mental health issues, that there are a multitude of approaches that we need and different strategies across our student cohort. And I think, this seems to be one of them tools in the box that's really helpful and will help a proportion of students. But also, we sometimes I think, need to add a note of caution that actually we don't alienate some students by sort of making them feel as though they're somehow to blame for some of the issues that they may have further on. So I come with it with real optimism, but also with some little bits of caution to just have in there, I think, with it.
That's fantastic, thank you. Liz, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Sure, hello there. So I'm Liz Bromley and I'm the Chief Exec of NCG, which is one of the UK's largest college groups. So we have something like 40,000 students on our books and 2,500 staff. Now imagine the size of that community, all living, working, studying, trying to work in the context of the pandemic, Brexit, which we've kind of all forgotten about, but which was so dominant 18 months ago, and the whole economic, social and industrial challenges that come from the current context. So I am super aware of the different levels of anxiety about learning, teaching, living, working, planning for the future, keeping the kids safe and well and ongoing in their education. And that creates a whole raft of challenges and indeed opportunities for us as a college group working within this really important sector at this time. So we were an early adopter of the FICA app well before the pandemic, and we were finding that to be a very useful, proactive tool to get the very best out of our students and to enable them to go on their journey with real positivity. Of course, during the pandemic, it has become a really vital component to our toolbox of copability and keeping people, including our staff, feeling supported. So like Amy and like colleagues around the table, this is about collaboration, it's about learning from others, it's about maybe contributing some of the things that we've seen and done ourselves, but always having that collaborative, positive spirit that we're living through a time where we can do great things, and together we must do great things.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Liz. And Nick, if you wouldn't mind, last but not least.
Thank you, Dan, and great to be on this virtual roundtable with my esteemed colleagues here today. So thanks everybody. And my name is Nick Bennett, and I'm co-chief exec and co-founder of FICA, the mental fitness platform. Our platform is essentially about understanding and bringing a scalable mental fitness and mental education solution to the education sector. The reason that I founded the business and why we feel this is so important is because we've recognized that the so-called soft skills or softer skills like confidence and motivation and positivity have hitherto been left out of formalized curriculum. And we've always believed that this feels wrong, that those skills are not, they're not soft. They're actually really essential for employment. We know that has been confirmed by employers, and we have confirmed that with research as well. And there is plenty of market data that shows that employers look for these soft skills as well as they do the more harder qualifications. And so our journey over the last 4 years has been to build a platform that's data-led, that proves that we can not just prevent the decline of mental health with this education and skills development, but increase performance. And that's really about raising the agenda that mental education has been left out of curriculum. And we believe very strongly, as do our partners who are using the platform, that this mental education gap is really important. And part of that comes from the fact that we know there have been some very important studies that have happened during COVID. One of them in particular was a study by the ONS that looked at students' declining mental health during the pandemic period. And it showed that there was an increase of around 70% of students claiming they had problems with declining mental health, but only 27% asked for help. So we have a problem if you like, in the system, in that mental health is declining, but the help solutions that are provided are not reaching people. And so what we think is really important is to position mental fitness and mental education as a formal part of curriculum. And I think that really leads on to what I would like to get out of this discussion is to try and understand. I'm not an educationalist, you know. I'm a tech guy, and I'm a product guy, and a startup guy. But I want to understand from the colleagues at the table, how important is this mental education gap? Why isn't it formally in curriculum? And should the government be doing something about this from a funding and subsidy point of view?
Absolutely fantastic, Nick. Thank you so much. So my first question really to the table, and you know, given the importance of curriculum, certainly within the Ofsted Education Inspection Framework, more so now than it has been before, and the importance of mental fitness, do we think the agenda, you know, is mental fitness important enough for government subsidy? I'm just going to open that up to the table to see what your thoughts on that are. Liz, come in there.
So I think we've just had an announcement of a £15 million subsidy for student hardship in higher education. Now, I think that one of the key factors to mental ill health or mental unfitness is where the pressures of life are such that students can't cope. Now, it seems to me absolutely right that higher education students get some form of hardship funding to alleviate the pressures on them. But actually, you think about the normal constituency of an FE college, they are more likely to come from a more disadvantaged background. They are more likely to come with greater pressures than your average, and I'm being very bland in those terms, but your average higher education student. And they are likely to come with the domestic pressures and disadvantages that are more likely to create mental strain. And so I think if you put all of the contextual disadvantages that FE students may bring with them, and you put that alongside this notional levelling up agenda, where the great outputs of our FE curriculum and skills provision should be recognised and respected alongside HE, I would put onto the table that if there's 15 million quid's worth of hardship funding available for HE students, that maybe that kind of investment in our FE students, taking away either the causes of mental health and anxiety, or actually ring fencing the funds to look at the causes of those anxieties and then the amelioration of them, would seem to me a reasonable ask at this current time.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in there? Nick, yes. You're on mute, which is our famous quote for the last couple of years.
Sorry, I was on mute. Apologies, Liz. I think that's an absolutely brilliant point, and I wonder where is the balance of money going? And I know that is the perpetual challenge of of the government, and I know that there are always competing factors. I guess the bit I wanted to add into this conversation was a piece of research that we undertook with NCFE, and it was that the reason that we undertook this piece of research was because we wanted to understand what the British public felt. Now, admittedly, they're not in charge of the the budgets, and they're not in charge of the curriculum, but they are representative of the people that go to colleges and the parents of the people who send them to colleges. And what we wanted to understand was what was their understanding of the importance of confidence as a lesson. And we positioned it like that importantly because we wanted to raise the concept that post the pandemic, or during the pandemic, because we did the survey happened towards the end of last year, we wanted to understand, has the pandemic made people think a bit more seriously about mental health, and therefore the consequences of our mental state? And yes, the 80% of British people felt that there had been some impact because of, and coping in the year ahead would be a challenge because of isolation, uncertainty and disruption. Sorry, that was 76% of Britons were concerned about that. So there's a concern that the effects of the pandemic have really impacted our mental well-being, and we're worried about it. And then we asked, what did they think about the concept of confidence being taught? And we used confidence as a hold-all for mental fitness and mental education, so the skills needed. And 80% of British people said that they thought confidence should be taught as much as maths and English. Now that for me stopped me in my tracks a little bit, just to think that maths and English are just they're staples of education. And of course they must be mandatory. But the fact that 80% of British people believe that confidence is as important as and should be given as much space in the curriculum, that was quite shocking. It feels like a resounding sort of vote from the British people that mental education and the transferable skills that you get from that are potentially as important as your academic skills, which again points to a recent debate I saw on LinkedIn actually, which David Gallagher was involved in, and it was talking about the purpose of education. It was in response to a piece from the government where the purpose of education was for work, and actually the purpose of education is for life and the skills that you need for life. And if that's the case, then this gap here where confidence and mental education skills, it feels so important that how can the government not take this seriously and decide to investigate subsidy and where to prioritize taking subsidy money from or creating new money for.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. Some real good valid points there. Chris, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I echo Nick's points there, and Liz really, obviously with my role, we saw the impact of student hardship funds, and we had relatively small amounts, but we got relatively larger amounts from our partner university as well, and it shouldn't have taken me by surprise, but it did take me by surprise. And alongside that, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of financial support, removing barriers, etc. But I suppose I was coming at it slightly differently. I also have industry placement team, which is part of the capacity to fund T-levels. And we've been very successful over the last couple of years with that. And I wondered if that's a good example where funds have been allocated to directly with measurable outcomes to fund capacity. So I wonder if there's a way, a model that would work for mental fitness, because realistically the government will only fund something that is measurable and is going to have the impact that they desire. So at the moment the government will fund study programs, and they'll say, well, there you go, you've got a pot of money, you need to allocate your funds accordingly. With industry placement as an example, there was a chunky amount of money there that allowed for teams to specifically look at engagement and preparation, leading to very good specific outcomes. And I wonder if that might be a kind of a pressure point that we could sort of work on, because you rightly, Nick, you talk about confidence, and again that falls directly into the confidence you have by transitioning to a college and a study program, underpinned by study skills, whatever we call it or wherever that sits. Confidence is an integral part of that, and so I think that there are lots of papers that talk about funding transition, which is incredibly important because the identity of individuals is inextricably linked to the discussions we're having now. So, and you might argue that having a positive outcome, passing your course, having a successful placement, all of those build your confidence. So I think that, there seems to be that if we can have that space where we can really measure very specific outcomes, get some capacity funding in place, then we are then dealing with quite specific actions that we can deal with, as opposed to a very wide generic approach.
I agree, Chris, and I think just on that, with regards to the positive impact of mental fitness and that correlation in terms of outcomes, what I'm really interested to know is how do you think, and this is to everybody at the table, how does positive mental fitness support things like retention and attainment within your educational programs, or the outcomes and employment progression outcomes from the courses and programs that are being delivered across the further education and skills sector? What impact positively does mental fitness support have on those core measures? Amy, could I bring you in on that one?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of what Liz was saying around higher education and the money that's being allocated to that, I think we've had similar issues around SEND. And so in terms of the SEND Green Paper at the moment, look at the disparity between secondary education and further education. My background was within SEND, so I think there are disparities that need to be addressed. And at the moment, it is absolutely the case that within the Milton Keynes College Group, I'm sure nationally, there's a huge appetite and acknowledgement this stuff is incredibly important, and we are fortunate within my teams to have a lot of expertise. However, and again, we're embedding it across all of the study programs, but I still feel that a lot of that is about us making internal decisions about allocating the money to those aspects of work, and again, having the strong links that we have across the city. So I think in terms of outcomes for learners, absolutely, we engaged in some work recently to look at all of those young people who declared that they had any type of SCMH need and their achievement and retention, and there was an extraordinary impact there. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is to be addressing and working with those particular young people who did succeed, and equally those that didn't, to try and unpick what those challenges were and be able to inform the practice that we are undertaking. So we're at the minute looking at all students completing a level 1 in managing wellbeing, but again, that's something that we've been using the catch-up fund for and our partnerships across the city, but we've been very fortunate in being able to do that, and I don't feel that's necessarily something that is able to be reflected across the sector, which is just dreadful, really. And I think we all need to be looking at how we can fund this more effectively.
That's fantastic, and you're absolutely right, Amy. Being able to use that pot of money to put learners, through that program, it's the positive impact that's going to have on their life as well as their educational attainment and progression. So I think you're absolutely right there. Richard, do you want to come in on that one?
Remember to take my hand down and then unmute myself. I think there's an interesting challenge, isn't there? I think about, and again, it'd be interesting going away and looking at the data, and I feel as though I need people who can advise me on this, about whole population approaches and targeted approaches, and what are we seeking to do for a whole population, and what are we doing that we're targeting at people who might need some specific help. In Greater Manchester, we've had significant investment from their devolved health authority, essentially, in FE over the last 3 years. By the end of the next academic year, it'll have been £1 million over 3 years. And actually, one of the beauties of that programme, I think, has been letting the colleges take ownership of what they want to deliver and what they feel is fit for their student population. So some of them colleges have gone very much down a trauma-informed approach and creating trauma-informed colleges and changing the culture. Some have focused on really targeted groups at transition, those students who weren't attending school lots, and then really putting a focus on them over the summer, and that's having some significant impacts a year, 2 years later on for them students. So I agree, Liz, that we need more resources, but I also think that, I keep talking about finding the sweet spot between health and education, because that money's come from health, and when it comes from health, they have a whole heap of health outcomes they want sat with it. When it comes from education, we have a whole heap of education outcomes. And where's the sweet spot?
Lots of nodding there, lots of nodding, Richard.
Yeah, when we keep our students on track, we allow them to succeed in their studies, and that helps. And then we all know if they succeed at college, and that is more likely to lead them to have a healthier, more fruitful life. Their mental health will be good if they go into good work and the like. So, it's that accountability mechanism will be really interesting about how we find, and again, they're allowing me in the evaluation to start to explore this about where we meet outcomes for us all that satisfy both sides, health and education. I think that's really crucial.
You're absolutely right. Nick?
I think that's a really valid point, Richard. And just from a personal level, at FICA, we've struggled with the positioning of what we've created over the last few years. When we first started the business, there wasn't much discussion around mental education and mental fitness, and it's been something that we've hopefully been tried to raise the agenda on, and it has become a broader topic in general in education. But it was very much, the discussion was very much around mental health, and we had some trouble initially because we were talking about educating and skills development, and it just didn't seem to fit, because mental health traditionally was about, and potentially still is, about supporting and helping when you have a problem. And I guess it's that it is a challenge, Richard, that has become, it's a budget challenge for some of our partners when we talk to them, because immediately it's considered that, well, FICA and is part, because it has the word mental, even though it's mental fitness, and we talk about education, it's a mental health thing. Therefore, it's all the way over here in a well-being and a budget that's related to small percentages of support for small percentages of people. And this is I think it's a major challenge actually that we have culturally, to understand that actually these skills, these mental education skills, are not about health. I think it's a really good point you make there. Actually, it's about skills development for life. That when a learner has developed those skills, they do attain and perform better. And indeed, we've to the point on transitions. It's one of the things that we focused on at FICA in our evaluation and our research, is to try and understand what happens during a transition period, because all of our assumptions and the data that we looked at show that during a transition period, which is essentially a period of change, psychologically we take a bit of a hit. Humans do, because things are different and we're not very good with change, and then we are filled with uncertainty. And what we've managed to prove in our randomized controlled trials is that we can turn that around and prevent the decline of key metrics, in key psychological metrics, and increase performance. And that is actually that's actually skills development, and it's needed before the problem has occurred. And that is essentially education. Education is doing something and preparing yourself before a problem arises. And I think Richard's point is really important. We're stuck, I think, culturally thinking that everything to do with mental health must be over here in health and supporting health conditions, and actually moving further up the hill and away from the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. What we're actually saying is it should be standard education. Now, I know that how do you make new pieces of standard education across the whole country? I really don't know the answer to that, and it's a massive challenge. But what I do know from psychology and from studies that we've looked at is that one of the challenges of a new habit is, if you're trying to do something new on your own or in small groups, it's very difficult. But when you're trying to do something new that's been normalized, it's much easier. So if everybody's doing it anyway, it's far easier for people just to fall in line and do it. And this is something that certainly with Liz Bromley and the NCG group, and with Chris and with Amy and all of our partners, we're suggesting that we talk about this as everybody does this on the way into college. So the transition point is a really important point that Chris mentioned as well. Transition in is something that potentially we could measure. We can measure, does that help to retain more students? Does that boost in mental fitness and education skills that will be used for life? Does that help at that point? And I think we have a big challenge as a country and as a culture to change our language around mental health, to have positive words in there, to talk about fitness, to talk about education, so that we can start to just open up that concept that this is really important skill development, and it should be available to everybody.
Thanks, Nick. So on staying on that topic of retention, attainment, and outcomes, Liz, from your perspective, one of the largest FE colleges in the country, how do you think positive mental fitness will support the sector in terms of retention, attainment, and outcome?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the conversation so far has been really interesting because identifying confidence or mental fitness as a functional skill and providing courses such as that Amy's mentioned about managing well-being seems to me to be just another element in the package that at NCG we offer as part of the curriculum, but almost as a co-curriculum, which is where students learn those soft skills that make them able to engage, make them community aware and good citizens, make them employable, you know, things around teamwork and good communications and timekeeping and writing skills, you know, all of those sorts of things. And in there, mental health and well-being, resilience, confidence, the things that will enable them to do so much better, the things that they will need to do in either the study space or the workplace. So I'm very interested in how we might think about doing this innovatively, more innovatively. And there has been a great deal of conversation over the last couple of years about decolonising the curriculum because of the EDI aspects and, you know, racial inequalities. So we talk about decolonising the curriculum, which, you know, may or may not be something that we can do effectively. What I think we can do is recontextualise our education so that mental health and well-being is part of the narrative. And I would just like to share with you, I'm not sure if you're aware, but at the moment at the Globe Theatre, they are running Romeo and Juliet under the directorship of Ola Ince, and they're doing it in a completely different context. So instead of this being the great romance and the story of two arguing families, the backdrop is one of mental health among young people. And on stage, the physical backdrop is of the suicide rates of young people in Britain. Now, if you can take, now I did English language and literature at university, so for me as a purist, this is just dreadful, absolutely awful, because that's not what you do with Shakespeare. But actually, if you put it through the frame of where we're living today, how we're living today, on the website, it's terrific. It says, Verona is sick, its structures broken and its citizens in a state of desperation. When a system favours the few, the many are left with nothing but unhealthy choices. And they then go on to say, so two teenagers find unexpected relief from society's sickness in each other. But what I was thinking was, oh, wow, that's describing us as we are right now, coming out of the pandemic. So rather than focusing on two teenagers finding relief, let's focus on what FE can do within its curriculum to say, you know, that many of the things that we teach, many of the contexts that we describe or the narratives that we articulate can be reframed in the way that we have ambitions to decolonize the curriculum and equalize it for all participants. We also should be looking at putting within the narrative that it is perfectly acceptable to expect mental health and fitness to be part of the narrative, and to look at some of the elements of the curriculum that have always been taken in a very traditional sense through a new lens, because we are operating in a society where it's very important. And so coming back to Richard's point, I actually wonder if that sweet spot between health and education is actually society, because a thriving society will have good health and good education. And if you have a strong society that supports its citizens through good health, good education, then actually the byproduct of that has got to be better mental health and fitness. So, you know, I just thought I would throw that one in as a That's new
really, really interesting. I think that, you know, that example of how you can embed something so differently, you know, Shakespeare as that example is such a good example of how you can embed something such as mental health into a curriculum. And so, you know, off the back of that, really, I think my question to the table is going to be, what do we think across, you know, further education, skills, higher education? What are the barriers, you know, to embedding mental fitness within the curriculum? So if we were to put on that different lens and we were to contextualize the way we teach, the way our educators teach, and the way people learn, what are those barriers in terms of how we can embed mental fitness into the curriculum? I'm going to call on Chris first, if that's all right.
It's probably gone quiet because that's, you know, it's one thing identifying the barriers. I guess we're always trying to fix the problems before we identify them sometimes as well. I mean, for me, I've had unexpected barriers. I kind of went into this knowing what I thought they were, which is you know, what interested me about FICA in the first place was the language and that change of culture and approach. And then I was a little bit, you know, you get somewhere and then you get floored by, I think probably the naysayers, you know, the negatives, the ones that don't see it the same way, and they're perfectly valid by making those points, entirely valid. And then you suddenly go, well, okay, that's you know, we'll take that on board, but where does that leave us? You know, so I think really for me the biggest barrier has been to engage the staff that have to roll this out, have to have the complex discussions that we're having now. You know, they are very nuanced, they are very complex, as most things are in education. And you know, getting a staff cohort, and I, you know, I can only think really at Newcastle, you know, you've got a lot of staff to engage there really and get on board. And I think what I'm starting to realise is very much like the work that we've been talking about, transition, etc. But it's about this identity, and of course people want to feel that they have ownership of it, that it's their solution, or their solution might be better, or actually their approach, how they access this for themselves is very different. So I think it's really staffing and access points, really. They're the main barriers that I'm finding are more difficult, I think.
Thank you, Chris. Richard.
I'm going to be a little bit risky here and risk creating an AOC policy on the hoof. It's not AOC policy, it's you, he says, if you're watching, David Hughes. But I mean, I had the privilege of going out to Finland to look at their system and mental health within their education system. And actually, it was interesting because they couldn't really point at what was their mental health because it's sort of all integrated. It's all part of their system. And the fundamental part of that is how many hours a student is in college. And we talk about what bits of money should we have and how do we fit bits into the curriculum. Actually, you know, one of the biggest complaints I get from principals on a day-to-day basis is the amount of different pots of funding and being given a different strand for this, that, the other, bid for this, bid for that. Actually, I think we could make a fundamental difference if we funded students for more hours. That would give us a bit more space potentially for these aspects in the curriculum, and it would give us the resources that we needed to do them. So actually, that would be a win-win-win if I think that there was more money for more hours that allowed some greater flexibility with the curriculum time, and actually for some of our students having less free time would be a really good mental health intervention in itself. So that's my sort of way of dealing with it, as straightforward as that.
Thank you, Richard. And Amy.
Negotiating the mute in the hand, sorry. I think for me, it's not necessarily a barrier, and not even a risk, so I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but with all of the work that we're doing as support services, I think there is the potential that staff across the group or whichever organisation can see it as the responsibility of one group of people to have accountability for this, to be the champions of it. So for me, again, a lot of the work that we've been doing in awareness raising amongst staff and equally addressing the mental fitness of staff is about, a bit like safeguarding, it's everybody's business, and it's about the language, and it's about encouraging those open conversations and devolving it from it being just the support team's consideration. So again, within the study programme, there are courses, care professions, for example, uniform public services, various others that's very obvious where mental fitness and all of these bits and pieces lie. But there are others, motor vehicle, let's say, where it is less explicit, and so at times it can seem as though it's the support services' responsibility in isolation. So it's about the more we do, the more risk, from my point of view, that we will be seen as the owners of this. And it's about the entire group college approach to it and empowering people. And again, as you say, Chris, having those conversations where it's okay for people to be uncertain or a bit anxious about how that's going to work and the reality in the day to day. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
No, that's right, and it's that given as well, isn't it? You know, it's okay not to be okay. You know, that it's not seen as a weakness. It's fine to speak about that, isn't it? Nick, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think some really interesting points. I thought that was really interesting, Amy. I think the falling between the cracks of, you know, whose responsibility is it when something's new, particularly in the context of between health and education, and also sounding a little bit different when we use words. We know when we use words like mental fitness, people get it and they understand it. They start to think it's very different to mental health. It is about progress. And it's different, and because it's new, there's a danger of falling between the cracks. One of the other barriers I believe that we have is one of value. You know, one of the barriers to adoption of anything is, how is it valued? You know, how is something valued in a system? So if we were just to remain on, you know, things like resilience and confidence, currently they're not as valuable on their own. Even if we make courses in them, they're not as valuable as maths. They're not as valuable as a diploma in an academic subject, or a diploma in a vocational subject. So at the moment we have a system which validates and certifies the things that we think are important and valuable to society, and therefore returns to the economy and, you know, validation. But if you look at the World Economic Forum published the top 10 skills of 2025, and looked at the key things that are going to be needed, and within that list were things like resilience and stress tolerance. So like the key skills required for 2025, of which 50% of all the workforce currently needs skilling on. Where is the value system, and is the value system a barrier? And do we need to do more around certifying mental education? And by that I don't mean mental health first aider. I mean thinking about confidence as a skill, or a technique, or a talent, or a vocation. You know, why couldn't we have someone who has done a diploma in confidence and is able to teach that? You know, that would be fantastic, to look at the value system that we have around other diplomas and think, if these skills are that important in the future, why can't they be valued in the same way with certificates and the systems that we know are then wound into society?
It's almost like the currency, isn't it, that you apply to those core meta skills that you need in everyday life, and as well as the world of work. So, you know, the currency that comes with education and skills, but not just in that, you know, vertical vocational technical education space, but with those, you know, everyday life skills, creativity, resilience, you know, that people need. Liz, you gave an absolutely perfect example, you know, of the Romeo and Juliet at the Globe at the moment, and that, you know, how we can embed, you know, that topic into something very differently from a contextualization perspective. What are your thoughts from an NCG point of view around the barriers to embedding, you know, mental fitness into the curriculum?
I think that the biggest barriers, and I see them, I should declare, I come into FE from 20 odd years in higher education, and I think that the two biggest barriers that I've seen in FE to a number of things, but this awareness and ability to embed mental health and fitness training within the curriculum, is the culture and the attitude. There is a diffidence in FE that we don't have the time, we don't have the money, and we're not really allowed to deviate from the things that we're funded for. And in HE, that's kind of swept away, because when the funding system changed, there was so much more autonomy in HE. People would do what they felt was important and relevant to their university. So I think that we are just on the cusp now of changing the attitude and therefore the culture within further education. And again, I'll give you an example. When I started at NCG, I asked what we were investing in the continuing professional development of our staff. And the answer was, well, we can't really afford very much. You know, we do the technical stuff, the stuff we need to do, but we can't really afford very much more. We looked at the way money was being spent, and it was very easy to put in place an inclusive leadership development programme to open up minds, because in fact, if you don't have continuing professional development for your staff will stagnate. I think particularly if the white paper enables more autonomy through the funding changes that have been mooted, then we have the ability within FE to take the same approach as has been taken in HE to say, these things matter. They matter to our students, they matter to our staff, and we do have the time, and we will find the money, and we will create the space. And Richard has said very clearly, you know, students have more time on their hands than they maybe need to have. Let's use that differently and productively to take away that huge barrier of, you know, we can't do it, we can't afford to do it, we're not funded to do it, we haven't got the time to do it, and say, yes, we will, because it's a priority. Mental health and well-being is the priority of 2021-22. And once we've got that right, along with the professional development of our staff, then we've got very solid foundations to move ahead and get that levelling up agenda with HE really, really strongly on the journey.
Absolutely, Liz, and it's that foundation that is going to be so important in terms of the not just the economic recovery post pandemic, but you know, the way people communicate, the way we live, everything is going to be different, and it's about how you support people through that, isn't it? With, you know, that mental fitness. So on that topic, what do you think could be done in terms of the levelling up between FE and HE and around policy? What do you think we should do in terms of policy to support mental fitness being part of that core curriculum programme within further education? I will come to Liz.
Okay, well, building on what I've just said, I think the changes to the funding structures that have been suggested within the white paper have got to be delivered. Give further education leadership the autonomy to use its funding in the ways that are most relevant to have real impact. You know, if our intention is to create a society that has great mental fitness and employability skills and the technical skills that it needs to bring our economy back, then we implement it by ensuring that mental health and education is within the curriculum, and then the impact of it is our society is improved, and we tick off the 3 things that Ofsted will be looking at. So the policy has to free up the way we are able to manage our colleges and our college groups so that we can do the things that students and learners need in order to have maximum optimal outcomes from their educational experience. So for me, levelling up has got to be give the same level of respect and autonomy to the leadership in FE as has been given to vice chancellors and their senior teams in HE.
Thanks, Liz. And on that, you know, do we think from a policy perspective, do we think something that is applied nationally is appropriate, or do you think, you know, that regional approach in terms of, as Liz says, giving the autonomy to those colleges in those particular local communities and giving them the powers and almost hiding what could be seen as that red tape to deliver these positive outcomes for people? What are the thoughts on that either being a national policy or something that is devolved regionally? I'll come to Nick.
I was about to say, Dan, that influencing policy is a little outside my pay grade, but we have been fortunate enough through the relationship with NCFE. I have been working with NCFE's policy team and trying to understand, I think, you know, some of the difficulties of raising and changing agenda. And I think, you know, to one of your points around levelling up between HE and FE funding, I think there's also some levelling up in culture and language to recognise that, you know, a university degree is not the only way to go. And I know, and this is, you know, certainly within funding, and, you know, Liz mentioned it at the beginning, beginning of this roundtable, there is a tendency, and this has been permeated a little bit by employers as well, that degree, you know, level education required. Now, I don't have a degree, and I have a startup, and, you know, I've made my way through life without a degree. I actually spent my time, some of my time, at art college, and then actually as a qualified chef, and have made my way into the agency world along with everyone who had their degrees and happily became a partner of an agency. You definitely don't need a university degree. but I think culturally that has to somehow, that needs to be reflected in the way the government supports the FE sector and supports vocational studies. And really, clearly, the T levels is a step forward. But I think more work has to be done on the promotion and the understanding of the brilliant, learning and vocational studies that come out of FE and how important they are. And actually maybe we almost need to just take the sort of the academic only HE world down a little bit, and bring some of this vocational real work to the fore. And I don't know how that happens, but I think there's some leveling up in culture to really respect and value the courses and the learning that comes through FE.
Richard, what can I ask? What's your thoughts on that?
I suppose, I think that the devolution needs to be down to the college level. I actually think, that Liz is saying about the leadership having some autonomy in this. Yes. So I think I outlined my policy position on it in terms of, I think, better funding, more hours. The other side of it, I would think, is that I want the health system, and I work on this daily, and I think they're much better at understanding FE is a different environment to either university or school. And therefore, if we had someone from government on right now, they'd talk about their investment in mental health support teams in schools and colleges. And it's great. And where the investment is there, it's pretty good and going quite well. However, they still need to have a bit of a specialist focus when they're looking at colleges. There's no other type of educational institution that's got the breadth of student body that we have in a college, from those HE learners through to our high needs learners, our 14 to 16-year-olds who are in some colleges. The breadth is enormous, and therefore we need to have a specific approach, a whole college approach, and that needs to be supported in the way that they throw money at HE and sometimes throw it at schools. We sometimes need an FE focus. So if we're going to do that, we need health to understand colleges, and more broadly, I think we need the funding support and the time support and the autonomy, because colleges are in different settings. Liz's colleges group, there will be different issues in West Lancs to what there are in London. So whilst they might have a strategy, they will have some different approaches there, right? They will have with the different businesses that they're trying to serve. They'll have some different approaches to them student populations, and they've got to make them decisions. Yes, in partnership with the health system and those around, but it's some autonomy to do that and to get it right for our student body that's important.
I 100% agree with you, 100%. I don't know where time's going, colleagues, but we've been chatting away, and I think we could go on for the rest of the day. What I'm going to ask is, I'll ask you for anyone watching this roundtable or listening, what would be your key takeaway that you would want people to get from today's session? So if you could have a bit of a think, what sort of closing remark do you want to give? That will be your takeaway from the conversation today, in relation to this mental fitness roundtable that we've had. So if I could start off with Amy, if you wouldn't mind.
For me, again, we all work so closely within what we're dealing with locally and within the nuances of everything that's going on. So I think for me, it's the competing agendas that we're all working with, but it's given me invigorated me again to explore how we are approaching this as a college and with our external partners. And as Liz was saying, it's about having those conversations from SLT and from bottom up, top down, and more broadly. And I think just continuing to keep banging the drum about all of these things, which sounds very simplistic, but it's about that the ongoing slog that we're all experiencing, especially in the face of the pandemic. And I know for us, when Richard talks about high needs and everything else, the cohort that we have coming through, 21-22, will be unique, and it's about energising our staff and working collaboratively. And I've just really enjoyed having the opportunity to explore it all with you, really.
It's good that you've been reinvigorated on this very important topic. Thank you so much for your contribution. Nick, can I come to you next? What's your key takeaway from today that, if anyone listening, what would you want them to get?
I think I think the overriding thing for me is that the recognition that the mental education and fitness skills like confidence and motivation are critical to all learners' progression and therefore the economy. Recognizing that currently curriculums are full, days are full, but referencing Richard's time machine, which I really like, create some more time, because we can do that. We can put more time in, and then suddenly we've been given this space that the government can fund, which is some extra hours into the curriculum and a gap for this really important set of skills and education, which should be as mandatory and important to us all and our children as maths and English.
Thanks, Nick. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's some really interesting discussions, and I guess you could take so many things from this, but I'm with Amy. I think that's really interesting in that it at a time when we're all tired at the end of academic years, and of course those academic years all blur into one. You know, you never get off that merry-go-round, do you? So I think it really does reinvigorate yourself. But as I was listening to people, I think I was also then very much like the app really is that you start to reflect and you start to revisit some of the things that you've already done. And I think that we can lose sight of that sometimes. We're trying to boil the ocean all the time. And actually, if I look back since engaging with mental fitness and having lots of discussions with Nick and his colleagues who are incredibly supportive and collaborative, you start to think about all the things you have done, and they are little things, more significant in some places. And you think, right, okay, we have shifted all of these things. So things like you talk about confidence and skills, softer skills, and we have a skills promise, but because of this, we've revisited that promise that's been there for 9 years and gone, actually, are we scratching the surface enough? Are we really doing the promise that we say we are? And therefore we've revisited it. We've allocated a considerably more time within the heart of our curriculum to address the wider skills that our learners need. So actually that's quite a brave move in what is education is quite risk averse sometimes. So actually sticking a big chunk of time. Now it'd be fantastic, Richard, if in a world that the government will suddenly give us some additional money for extra time. I wouldn't disagree, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But I think it's great sometimes, like everything, isn't it? If it's said it and it's in a presentation or it's in a round table, sometimes people go, oh yeah, maybe we should do that. As you say, I think it's AOC policy now, isn't it? So.
Fantastic. Thank you. A nice segue, Richard. I think if we can bring you in next.
I think whenever I take part in these discussions, I'm just mindful of the leadership in FE and the need for leadership to put this as at the heart of what colleges do. I can meet lots of people who are very enthused about this work, who are working at a department level or running part of the college, but if the leadership take it on, then it becomes whole college, and we need to see, and that's fantastic. And it's just great when we see leaders driving this work within the college, because that drives the culture, it drives the activity, and does. So I think that important role of leadership that I've seen here today from colleagues, and I'm also just on the side of this, just thinking, I can't help thinking at this point, we keep coming back to students, but staff mental health over the next year, and just really thinking about that. I was talking to somebody the other day who works in mental health and wellbeing with staff, and she was saying to me that in education, staff are used to burning themselves out knowing there's a break around the corner, and they go like mad, stop, go like mad, stop. Over the last year and a half, they've just gone like mad, and there's a danger we're going to lose half of the summer to it. And I'm worried about the beginnings of next year and making sure the leaders and some of the key staff have got the energy to get through. So I think we need to think about these things in terms of the staff. And I know Liz mentioned doing the staff, and I think, Chris, you said you were doing it with the staff, but I think thinking about the mental fitness and well-being of our staff. And then thinking about as well, going away and thinking about those whole population approaches, the impact of them alongside those targeted approaches where we may pick students or staff that we think need that extra support that we put in different ways. So I'm going to go away and think about all them things and how they feed into our thinking on our work on mental health in AOC.
Fantastic, thanks Richard. And Liz?
Well, we've talked about the role of education, haven't we, this afternoon? And if we think that the role of education is to open and expand minds and imagination to be ready and fit for life, then, you know, like runners needing to keep fit to be able to go further and faster, we need our minds to be fit so that we can actually expand and be resilient and go further and go faster. So I think the role of colleges, as I've been hearing colleagues talking today, is about creating that stable environment where we perhaps put mental health and fitness alongside safeguarding. We give it that real importance in terms of all that we do, so that we are really positive learning organisations focused on all of our people, bringing in what Richard's just said about staff as well, so that they're all able to develop those first-rate skills that make them either great employees because they're on the staff payroll, or great employees of the future, you know, qualified not just with technical skills, but also that confidence and that resilience and that capability that they're going to need to get through life with all of its challenges and opportunities. And they do say that at the heart of a thriving community, you will find a thriving college, but within a thriving college, you have to find thriving people, staff and students alike. So I think that it's a time, you know, to look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're prioritising what we're doing to ensure that our staff and our students, all of our learners, can truly thrive in the learning organisations that come through FE.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liz. Colleagues, it's been an absolute pleasure facilitating this afternoon's session, and I just want to thank you all for joining our mission to mainstream mental fitness. For anyone who's watching and listening to today's roundtable, if you've got any questions or you'd like any more information about some of the best practice that's been shared today and keeping that conversation going, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at NCFE or any of the colleagues that have been involved in today's session. So I just want to draw that to a close and thank you all so much for your time and your contribution. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's session.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.